Hi there, so I just thought I'd do a quick review of the Cyclist Who Went Out in the Cold by Tim Moore. This isn't to be confused by the book, The Cyclist Who Came In From the Cold, which is a spy novel. I believe this was what we're trying to get at. Quite a humoured quip. That kind of describes the man really. Tim Moore is a sort of a travel writer and he's written several books. Most of them are relating to long distance endurance cycling, and yeah, it's just essentially I've read a few of his books actually. So I've read this one here, and I've also read the Cyclist Who Geronimo, which was the book that he where he cycled round Italy on a barn find 100-year-old bike that he managed to obtain. That's a cracking book. But yeah, I just thought I'd do a quick review of this. So essentially, what it involves is he has to cycle the EV13 trail, which is referred to as the Iron Curtain Trail. It's just this red line here. So essentially, he's traversing the edge of the European border to the Soviet Union, and essentially it's his take on riding it, and essentially that's it in a nutshell. He does it on a Mifa 900 East German shopping bike. So it's this very small bike with 20-inch wheels, and he essentially straps loads of bags to it, and he starts from the north coast of Finland in a place called Kirkenes. I probably absolutely butchered the pronunciation there, but he starts there in the winter, just to add, and he makes his way slowly through the Scandinavian tundra towards Russia, and so this trail is a 6,800 kilometer trail from Kirkenes in Finland to Sarajevo on the Black Sea coast in Bulgaria. And so he does this back in 2015, I believe, and it takes him about 6 or 7 months to do. And yeah, so essentially, the book is written chronologically, so there isn't that much chopping and changing in where he is on the route at any one time. He sort of starts in Finland, and then there are chapters depicting the geographical location that he's in. However, throughout the book, he does chop and change in terms of talking about his time in the Soviet Union when he was cycling. When he was driving in a car with his wife through the area. So I thought the book was very humorous. The comments from well-known people have all stated the comic factor. He's quite a self-deprecating writer, in the sense that he kind of likes to take the piss out of himself quite a bit. Doesn't take himself too seriously, and I also like the idea. I also liked how he seamlessly changes the talking about his time touring on the EV13 trail, but also he sort of switches into giving historical insight into the various geographical locations that he cycles through. So for me, one interesting thing was him talking about the Winter War, which was fought in Finland in 1939 and 1940. Essentially, the Russians invaded Finland in the Second World War, as they thought it would be a strategically advantageous location, and talking about the sort of terribly low temperatures, and how the Russians saw very large casualties, given how many Finns they were fighting, and how that ultimately taught them a lesson, and how going forward to Stalingrad they were much better equipped to fight. So I thought that was very interesting. I thought the book was well written, in the sense that you didn't have to be a bike, to appreciate it. He doesn't really focus too much on the gear and what he's taking. He sort of just focuses on sort of the journey that he's taking, and doesn't really sort of talk about statistics and bike techie words or anything like that. So you won't get that bogged down if you're not really into that sort of thing. So yeah, anyone can read that. He also highlights the sort of cultural differences that he encounters between the nations. So he goes through about 20 different countries throughout the time, and he sort of states how the Finnish people are very blunt, and how the Russian people are sort of they don't really like to make themselves sort of known to people, sort of keep themselves to themselves, and how that stems from the Soviet era, where people were quite wary of what other people thought of them for the fear of getting sent off to the gulag, and how people, though, no matter how poor they were throughout the rest of Eastern Europe, were very keen to help him, and how people were particularly upbeat in Serbia and in Turkey, for example, and how he mentions the ongoing sort of refugee crisis, and sort of mentioning the sort of mass movement of Syrians through Europe, and how there was a lot of tensions on the border between the EU and the other neighbouring states, with all the bottlenecks of residents, well, not residents, refugees waiting at the border. And yeah, so I thought all that was very interesting, especially given it was written before Brexit. So he did actually state the fact that there was tensions with sort of a fractured Europe, and how there was very poor parts of the EU, and how people were quite sort of disillusioned with how things were being run. And I thought it was very interesting that he was saying that, as that was before the whole Brexit debacle in 2016. So I thought that was a very interesting insight. And yeah, so I thought I really enjoyed the book personally, because it had a lot of significance to me, as I've gone bike touring solo myself, and so I'm sort of very aware of the sort of the gritty, sweaty nature of bike touring, and how you ultimately get enjoyment through suffering, and sort of finding it quite difficult, and the constant toil to find calories. He was talking about pulling up to sort of deserted cafes and sort of begging for them to start the fries and get chips, for example, things like that. So I found that very sort of very nice to read, essentially. And yeah, just kind of the whole exploration vibe, the idea of cycling the length of the Iron Curtain on a crappy bike with 2 gears with tiny wheels. I mean, it sounds completely stupid, and he fully acknowledges it. So I think that's absolutely great. And yeah, so all in all, it was a great book, and I definitely agree with him in how bike tourists have been described as convicts of the road, really. So yeah, it was a really good book, and yeah, definitely recommend it. And also Geronimo, the other book that he wrote about cycling the 1914 Giro. So thank you very much for watching, guys, and take care.